I think it was the political philosophers Tears for Fears who said everybody wants to rule the world. I don't know about that. I think that sounds like a lot of work, but I think all of us want human security. And human security can mean different things for different people. And in this section, I want to spend a bit of time talking about how academics and policymakers and data science people have come up with ways at trying to come up with good measures of human security, because what gets measured gets studied, right? And the Sustainable Development Goals, screenshot from this here from the UN Food Program. No poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, decent work and economic growth, reduce inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, climate action, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnership for these goals. I think this is as good of a summation as any in one slide as I can get for trying to summarize the topics that the literature that we're going to focus on in this class talk about when they talk about human security, as well as for our ways at trying to understand how these things could be linked to conflict. Some of them have linked to the economic drivers of conflict we've already talked about previously today and in week one. Others, like with inequality and poverty. Others, like good health and well-being, education, gender equality, are going to be other ones we're going to be getting into in more detail. And I think for me, it's similar to the dichotomy between peace and war is with human security and the lack of it. I think you really need to, the way that I see it is try to understand the lack of it in order, when something is absent, helps you understand what could be there, right? For this empty riverbed here in Nepal, in the rainy season, that is going to look completely different. As with human security, sometimes it is there, other times it is not, and sometimes it can be easier to backslide than you might think in a number of these different contexts we're going to look about. And for human security, a lot of the challenges might not necessarily always be clear or be the same in all types of instances. And for this, it makes me think of snake bites. I come from the U.S. I came from Los Angeles. My school was in the foothills in Los Angeles, and I always will remember my science teacher every once in a while would be called out to the sports fields with an empty 5-gallon water jug to be able to go catch rattlesnakes, and he would bring it back in the jug to be able to show all of us students, learn a bit about biology and the natural environment that we were surrounded with. But they were always something that rattlesnakes were poisonous, but it was not something that was a health issue that much in Los Angeles. Similar like with Australia, right? That has the 10 deadliest snakes around the world. I think it's all 10. Someone correct me in the comments or in the workshop if I'm wrong. But it was something that's remarkable because of the low death rate for people of snake bites in Australia. That these, I mean, I've seen brown snakes since I've been in Canberra, walking around the wonderful outdoors here in Canberra. But it's not something that I had ever thought about as being a human security threat to myself or my children because of the state capacity. And then you have this study here from that was remarked on in the BBC a couple of years ago that said over 1 million people have died in snake bites in India, which could be a reflection of how many people come into interaction with nature in ways that would be different than in a developed society, but then also the capacity potentially to respond when the worst actually happens. And I think to focus on the threats when these human security challenges are manifest and human security is not present, you could think of it along a couple of different factors. Economic, with persistent poverty or unemployment. Political, when human security is absent due to government repression or human rights abuses. Food, a topic we're going to be coming back to in a few weeks with hunger and famine. Health, like with snake bites, infectious diseases, unsafe food, malnutrition, or a lack of health care. It can be one of the most difficult challenges for developing states to be able to meet. Environmental challenges, which we're also going to get to, environmental degradation, resource depletion, natural disasters, and pollution. Personal human security threats like physical violence, partner violence, crime, terrorism, other forms of public violence, domestic violence, and child labor. And then communal violence, which we've also talked about already, and we will in the future, interethnic, religious, or other, should be other identity-based tensions, right? So you can define human security according to the threats, or in some way of the difficulty, of course, is prioritizing all these different threats. A government has to theoretically provide all answers or address all of these challenges, but with some it can be difficult, and certain ones might be more important in certain parts of the country than in others. And in focusing on the threats and the lack of human security in certain areas, I do want to stress, by and large, the fact that the world is vastly better off now than it was even when I was born, or when people were born 100 years ago, 200 years ago. There's a famous example of Lord Rothschild in the UK that died due to an infection that even the poorest person in almost any society nowadays would be able to get treatment for, because the science didn't exist, and so money could buy certain things, but there just wasn't the capacity to address certain challenges, and that's changed over time. And so you can see here, since 1990, the incredible decline in diarrheal diseases by age from 1990 to 2019. Not something that's pleasant to talk about, but it's something that still kills over 1 million children per year. And you see the age groups, by and large, the largest amount of people more vulnerable to this were the under fives, and that number has gone down by almost 2/3, from over 1.5 million to 500,000 in the space of 30 years. So there's these huge developmental changes that have happened within one lifetime, and the question is how these changes are going to have an effect on a government's ability to provide for their people, as well as the number of people that are going to be around because they aren't dying from these kind of preventable health challenges. Other health challenges you can mention that I thought about was malaria, also something that killed over 1 million people per year. You can see areas that you have cases, by and large, surrounding the tropics, but then you have others that have had 0 cases in the last couple of years, and that number is gradually spreading. And now with the mRNA vaccine research, there's trials at vaccines for malaria that hold a lot of promise. So these kind of fundamental challenges to human development, where they are and what challenges countries face, are changing over time. So again, like with the readings this week, it depends on if you're looking at a country at a particular point in time or over time. And I think these challenges with diarrhea and malaria show the importance of looking at either one country over a period of time or how society has changed to understand the effects that might have on states and the likelihood of political violence. This is another way of trying to visualize human security and human development. Long and healthy knowledge, like with education, you'll see a lot of these fundamental elements at what go into human security are similar across different international organizations and research efforts. I think the Human Development Index is the most famous empirical measure of development and for human security. The latest graph that I could find was from 2015, but you see regions of development of different levels around the world, and the different elements that go into this particular index are ones that we should potentially think about, kind of like with democracy. How we conceive our measures theoretically help determine what we should measure and what effect we're likely to find when we actually look at cases individually or comparatively. So what goes in to this particular measure, long and healthy life, they proxy that by life expectancy at birth, knowledge, expected years of schooling, and the average number of years of schooling, and a decent standard of living is gross national income. per capita by the number of people with purchase power parity, because certain things are more or less expensive in different parts of the world. And I think for me, at least, I would encourage you to see, oh, look, there's GDP again. That GDP is one of those measures of a whole host of different, it's here a measure of standard of living. In Collier and Hoeffler as a measure of the prize for being able to take over the state. And so I think one of the things we need to think about is how all these are combined, how much weight we give to all of these different factors, and trying to how much to understand the level of development in countries that have conflict. And similar to the other graphs, you see a gradual increase in development over time from 1980. That you do see a couple of downtrends around 2008, 2009, which was a function of the economic uncertainty, as well as in the aftermath of the end of the Cold War, coming in with 1990 with the ongoing conflicts. You could break up each one of these strands and look at the countries to see how much they vary over time. I think it's a really interesting story to see what element goes into shaping overall measures and how countries are compared against each other. There is the technical appendix if you're ever really interested in that, and I would highlight the fact that they have other measures, including inequality adjusted, gendered development and gender inequality, and different more multi-dimensional measures of poverty. So I think, kind of like with a lot of other studies over time, starts with simple understandings and simple models, and then you think theoretically of the costs and benefits and how it's kind of like a recipe, right? With I love Cooks Illustrated. They are a magazine series and a book series, and they approach cooking with the scientific method, in which they have a whole bunch of inputs, ingredients, and they use different ways of mixing them together. They use different ways of cooking them, kind of like using different models, and you reach different outcomes and you see what works and what doesn't. You always kind of fine tune it. These kind of ways of understanding the human development and human behavior is also changing over time, and the recipes are always increasing, including by trying to get more accurate measures, and kind of pushing towards, like with Buhaug et al., these subnational measures. You might look, oh, hey, look, all these are national level measures. Why are we using that? Well, they also have developed subnational human development indicators as well, to kind of show you with a lot of these factors we're going to look at in this class. You are not stuck with one level of analysis. If you really are driven by individual behavior, you can use surveys with subnational variations within or between countries. You now have subnational options like the Human Development Index within countries. Or if you have the national level, you can use that as well, or just global. Some people use the whole systems level of analysis, like in international relations, to look at how the whole system has changed over time. So it depends on the research question and what you're really looking at. So that is a brief overview of human security as how we think about what goes into a good life, how that understanding or how we try to operationalize what we think of as a good life might be comparable across contexts, maybe less so, and how that can flow into how we understand how human development will connect to security, which we're going to look at in this week as well as in subsequent weeks in this class. So let's take a quick break, and I'll come back with our discussion of the Burundian case study, one of the least developed countries and one in which you have had a history of challenges of political instability, repression, and a lack of human security of the type that we've just talked about.